Imagine for a moment that you are a new Russian soldier. You've signed up for military service because your country dangled a contract in front of your face that promises you more money than you have ever seen. That's a good sign, you might think to yourself. The military can afford to pay me this much, I'll have all of the supplies I'll ever need when I eventually enter Ukraine. Eventually happens within a couple of weeks of you signing up. And as for the equipment, it just isn't there. Putin's troops are quickly finding out that their country doesn't have what they need to make them anything other than cannon fodder in Ukraine. Those soldiers are now fighting naked, and it's because Russia has no armor left. A combination of dwindling supplies and Russia simply not caring about the fates of its soldiers is to blame for this armor issue, as the Telegraph reported on November 29th. In a detailed article that dives into Russia's equipment woes, the outlet says that scenes of Russian soldiers who don't have helmets, body armor, or even load-bearing vests being chased down by Ukraine's drones are becoming commonplace, especially on the Lyman front. Igor Komok, who is the deputy commander of Ukraine's 2nd Mechanized Battalion, says that he has seen the same scene play out time and time again, though it's also something that only started happening in Lyman fairly recently. It's a new trend, especially if you compare it to last year when there were practically no similar cases, Komok tells the Telegraph. We can say that they are being forced to fight without the armor they need. They must do it. This is surprising, both because Russia isn't equipping its soldiers and due to Lyman having once been high on Putin's priority list. The city, which is in the Donbass region, was among the first major captures in that region during the initial months of Putin's supposed special military operation. Toward the end of May 2022, Russia had ramped up the pressure on the Donbass to the point where it was able to occupy Lyman. At the time, DW reported that holding Lyman gave Russia a springboard it could use to launch assaults on Sloviansk, making the city tactically significant for Putin. He wants to claim the entire Donbass region as Russian, so you would assume that Lyman would remain a priority. Russia lost Lyman back to Ukraine in October 2022, as The Guardian reports. Russia was forced to admit that its soldiers had retreated from the city amidst images of Ukrainian troops entering and raising their country's flag. Putin was enraged, embarrassed, and to this day, Russia's forces have failed to fully recapture Lyman. Ukraine's defense of the city has been strong enough that UNN reported that Russia's forces were trying to bypass Lyman, rather than fight to reclaim it. Presumably, that attempt to bypass the city failed. Now, frustrated at his inability to recapture a city Russia once held, Putin is throwing unarmored soldiers at Lyman. Coming back to Russia's unarmored Lyman troops, we don't just have to take one Ukrainian commander's word for what's happening. There is video footage that shows us that Komok isn't lying. Shared across social media, including X, the 94 seconds of footage shows multiple incidents of Ukrainian drones finding Russian soldiers who are in no way equipped to carry out the types of assaults that Putin is having them launch. These soldiers are often hiding, at least until they see that a Ukrainian drone is overhead. Then they run. And that's when you see how badly Russia has failed them. At the very best, the soldiers are in combat fatigues and nothing else, meaning they may as well be naked when faced with a bullet or a kamikaze drone. Fatigues won't do much to stop either, and Ukraine's Lyman forces are taking advantage of that fact time and time again. Much of the video is too disturbing to show on YouTube. What it shows is Russians who are unequipped and have no chance of surviving, as well as the inevitable results of those same soldiers being confronted by Ukraine's drones. The Telegraph reports that Ukraine's 66th Brigade has also shared photographs of at least 6 Russian soldiers who were killed while wearing no form of armor to go along with the video clips. And the numbers don't lie. Lyman has become the site of under-equipped Russian assaults. Helmets were only worn in 4 groups out of the last 20, Komok says when discussing a recent spate of Russian assaults on Lyman. That is, these are not isolated cases. What this means is that only about a fifth of Russia's soldiers are heading into assaults on Lyman with the appropriate protective gear. Considering this is a city that has undergone several dozen assaults during the final few days of November alone, this can only mean one thing. Russia is relying on meat and cannon fodder rather than anything that even comes close to resembling combat tactics. The question has to be asked, why? After all, it's clear that Putin values Lyman. He wants to capture all of the Donbass region, which places Lyman squarely on Russia's radar. The city has been captured before, only to be liberated, and Russia is now launching dozens of assaults against Lyman every week, if Komok is to be believed. If all of that is the case, then why is Russia sending soldiers into assaults without the most basic protective gear that all soldiers should have? There are several reasons, starting with the most obvious. High losses have contributed to an equipment shortage that may make it impossible for Russia to provide anything that its soldiers need in Ukraine. At least that's according to Dmytro Zmylo, who is the director of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Center. Zmylo tells The Telegraph, The lack of protective gear is an adaptation to the current conditions on the front line, where the Russian army is suffering disproportionately high losses in daily meat grinder assaults. An adaptation is a diplomatic way to put it. The point Milo is making is that Russia is dealing with so many financial issues right now that it's struggling to equip its soldiers. Of course, Russia will never outright say that, especially not to the soldiers that Putin is sending into Lyman. But the signs are there. For instance, October 3rd saw Forbes report that Putin is on the verge of running out of the money that he's using to pay Russia's soldiers. Having relied on oil and gas revenues to sustain the war, along with the draining of Russia's reserves, Russia is struggling with payment. The first half of 2025 alone saw Russia blow over $25 billion on soldier pay, which amounts to almost 10% of all of Russia's federal spending. Soldiers now receive sign-up bonuses of $28,000 and have monthly pay that starts at $3,200 and can go higher, Forbes adds. These are unsustainable numbers, and it seems that the highly paid soldiers in Putin's army are finding out that the money that should be spent on their equipment is instead being paid out to them for the few months that they managed to survive in Ukraine. United 24 media adds that these economic issues are leading to Russia launching mass infantry assaults that are conducted under poor operational conditions due to broad economic issues affecting supplies. In a November 10th report, the Kyiv Independent also asked the question of whether Russia is running out of money that Putin can use to continue his invasion. The outlet points out that Russia's budget deficit has been over 2% for 7 consecutive years, leading to Putin abandoning his goal to keep the deficit under 1%. Russia has also drained its national wealth fund to the point that it only has $50 to $60 billion left, which is less than the $70 billion deficit expected in 2025 alone. Russia is in the midst of a financial crisis, and you can learn more about that crisis and why it's breaking Russia's back in our video. Moving away from the money issue to how that issue manifests on the battlefield, it's not just the soldiers in Lyman dealing with equipment woes. Russian troops all over Ukraine don't have what they need to do things that Putin wants them to do. Back in September, the Kyiv Post reported on intercepted Russian calls that reveal how poorly equipped many on the front lines of Putin's war really are. Gas canisters are not issued. What we get is canned meat, grains, and cigarettes, and that's it. Nothing else. The rest we have to buy with our own money or people send it from home. Russians are being forced to crowdfund so they can buy their own equipment. And when supplies do become available, under-equipped soldiers are dying on the runs that could see those supplies distributed. So that's the question asked and answered, right? Russia's Lyman forces are assaulting without even the basics because Russia can't afford to provide them. That's part of the answer, but it doesn't cover everything. After all, Russia's equipment woes are hardly breaking news. What's happening in Lyman may be new, but there have been reports of Russian soldiers being sent into battle without the equipment they need almost from the moment that Putin launched his invasion. For instance, May 2022 saw the Moscow Times report on Russian soldiers who were so under-equipped that they were being forced to buy their own field uniforms. Jackets and trousers were apparently luxuries that Russia wouldn't provide, even around the time that Russia managed to first capture Lyman. In October 2022, coincidentally the same month that Russia lost Lyman, The Guardian reported on new Russian conscripts bemoaning the fact their army provides them with nothing. "They gave us absolutely no equipment. The army has nothing. We had to buy all our gear ourselves," a 23-year-old conscript named Vladimir said. "I even had to paint my gun to cover the rust. It's a nightmare. Soon they'll make us buy our own grenades." If helmets aren't being provided 3 years after Vladimir made these comments, it may be a safe bet that his claim about grenades are true. Around the same time as the publication of The Guardian's piece, Fortune also wrote about Russia's soldiers living in filthy conditions while dealing with shortages of food and medicine. The point here is that equipment problems have existed for Russia since the start of the invasion. So while it's true that Russia's crumbling economic situation shoulders much of the blame for Putin sending his soldiers into full-blown assaults on Lyman without helmets or body armor, there's something else going on here. Something that has been evident since Putin launched his invasion, and comes down to how Russia's president sees the hundreds of thousands of soldiers that he sends into Ukraine. It's not just that Russia can't afford to buy the armor its soldiers need. It's that even if it could, Russia often wouldn't, because Putin doesn't care about what happens to his country's soldiers. Putin has demonstrated himself to be a callous man throughout his tenure as Russia's president. One of the first major challenges that he faced as president was the Kursk submarine disaster, which occurred in August 2000 and saw the submarine sink to the bottom of the Barents Sea. All of the Kursk's 118 crew died in that disaster. Putin's callous nature reared its ugly head. Sky History says that Putin refused all help from other nations, perhaps believing that Russia could handle the problem itself. He also didn't want to potentially reveal any of Russia's submarine secrets by taking up any of the offers he received. By the time Putin decided to accept an offer of help, as he did when the UK came calling, it was too late. The Kursk took its entire crew with it. Early into his reign, Putin showed that he would prioritize what he wants over the lives of those under his command. What we're now seeing in Lyman and elsewhere in Ukraine is that callousness honed by 25 years of rule that has led Putin to become even more single-minded and ruthless than he was when he first took office. The point here, and one that's made by Zmylo to The Telegraph, is that Putin cares so little about his soldiers that it doesn't matter to him if they're well equipped or not. If they aren't, they can still be sent on assaults because a moving Russian soldier is a soldier who can soak up Ukraine's ammunition. For the Russian command, they are merely expendable resources for achieving the Kremlin's political goals, Zmylo says. Russian groups are exhausted and suffer heavy losses from constant assaults, and the Russian leadership demands results on the battlefield, resources to be expended. To Putin, a soldier and a helmet are the same thing, money spent to take Ukraine. Why pay for helmets and body armor when you've already spent tens of thousands of dollars to get the soldier to sign a contract? It's a strange approach to take, especially for a man who's trying to win a war, but we can see the evidence of Putin treating his soldiers like expendable resources in the casualty figures. According to minfin.ua, Russia has experienced 1,172,860 casualties between the start of Putin's invasion and November 30th. Context: Russia suffered around 50,000 casualties during its decade-long war against Afghanistan during the Soviet era. That means Putin has sacrificed over 23 times more soldiers in Ukraine in less than 4 years than Russia lost in the last major war in which it was involved. Russia's soldiers are just a resource for Putin to expend because he believes that he will always be able to find more. And to drive the point home, there are many more instances beyond the lack of armor provided to the Lyman soldiers that prove how little Putin cares about his soldiers actually having a chance of surviving. The Mirror US claims that Putin has created a new mandate that enables him to recruit Russians who suffer from severe illnesses that should disqualify them from military service. Those with cardiac and endocrine diseases are supposedly now options for Putin, as are those with sexually transmitted diseases such as syphilis. Russia is also more than happy to send old men into the fight, as we reveal in a video covering the grandpas that Russia is sending to war, which you can watch on our channel. There's no way that Russia could expect these kinds of soldiers to survive long, but they're not meant to. They're just meat for the grinder that Putin has created in Ukraine, and as if to place an exclamation mark on how little Russia cares for its soldiers, Fortune reports that the Kremlin has gone so far as to gift actual meat grinders to the grieving families of Russian soldiers who have died in Ukraine. This is either the most tone-deaf condolence ever offered or a cruel joke. Either way, it's yet more evidence that the soldiers in Lyman aren't without armor solely because Russia doesn't have any available. Putin literally doesn't care whether his soldiers are equipped or not. You don't need a helmet to soak up another Ukrainian bullet. However, there may be yet another factor at play in what's happening on the Lyman front, and it's a factor that showcases how Putin's lack of regard for his country's soldiers has transformed into sheer brutality on the front lines. That brutality isn't reserved for Ukraine's troops and civilians. Russia's commanders are just as likely to turn their attention to their own soldiers for doing even the slightest thing wrong, leading to them purposefully sending troops into battle without armor. This is a practice called zeroing, and it's the most horrifying example of how Russia treats its soldiers. Zmylo touches on the practice when speaking to The Telegraph, stating, "In the Russian army, it's extremely common to punish personnel by zeroing them, when commanders deliberately send their fighters to their deaths by Ukrainian drones. There are all sorts of minor infractions that can lead to somebody being punished in this fashion. Getting wounded in battle seems to be one of them," Zmylo reveals. He claims that it's commonplace for Russian commanders to send wounded soldiers into battle without even arming them, never mind providing them with helmets and body armor. This seems to be done because the commanders only see one purpose left in these disposable resources: dying for Putin's cause. Other infractions can be as small as carrying 1 liter of water instead of 2, or wearing non-regulation patches, The Telegraph adds. Both can lead to a Russian soldier being arrested by the military police and, if they're unlucky, being sent out into an assault group as punishment. It's also possible that commanders don't even tell their soldiers what they're walking into, as Kamok suggests in The Telegraph. Most likely, Russian troops do not even suspect that they're approaching the positions of Ukrainian forces, he told the outlet. The Russian command convinces the personnel that there are no Ukrainian troops ahead, only allies. It's a twisted form of forced complacency. Convince your soldiers that they're safe to move out, only to watch as they're inevitably mowed down while not wearing any armor. The only possible reasons for this seem to be the punishments that have already been mentioned, or Russia uses these soldiers to work out from which positions Ukraine is firing or deploying drones. Either way, it comes back to what we've mentioned several times, which is that Russia does not care about its soldiers. They're expendable, tools to be used however Putin sees fit. So Russia has several issues affecting its forces in Lyman and the rest of Ukraine all at once. A lack of equipment and supplies is certainly one of them, and it has been since the beginning of the war. But perhaps even more important than that is how Putin sees his soldiers. They exist to be sent into the meat grinder he's created. How long Putin can maintain this approach as thousands of Russians die every month remains to be seen. It can't be much longer. Relying on cannon fodder isn't going to help Putin capture Lyman. What do you get when you combine Russia's inability or refusal to provide its soldiers with the armor that they need to launch assaults with complete tactical incompetence? You get a military force that all too easily falls for the traps that Ukraine sets for it. That's what happened toward the end of November in the besieged town of Mirnorat. Russia thought they were winning, then Ukraine's F-16s unleashed hell. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering Russia's growing equipment crisis. And thank you for watching.